Now, the opposition NDC says it will not accept the result of what it is calling a flawed election. At a just-ended media briefing on the exhibition of the voter register, the party's flag bearer, John Mahama, said the party will resist any move that will result in holders of the voter's ID card not participating in the December elections. The party alleges the ongoing voter exhibition exercise has revealed that the voters register is not credible, aside from what it alleges to be a grand plot to remove its sympathizers from it. John Mahama says his running mate's voter ID card has been found to be invalid during the exhibition in KEEA. She's had to hand over that old card, and a new card was issued to her at the district EC office in Elmina. He says in some areas like Aswase, more names have been added to the register that previously did not exist. We'll bring you details of that shortly, but some prospective voters in the voter region are already expressing concerns about their inability to find their names on that register.
Unko amopan kome jejemle register moa anye mi apa jijiba isi bossa na wona na tun alabe anye jijibe makonya pa kadlashi.
We are concerned that some people can't find their names in the register. It is worrying. The EC must fix the situation because we don't want any surprise on December 7. This can trigger a lot of confusion and we don't want it, so the EC must address it.
Registration center.
During the time of registration, there were a lot of people who attained 18 years. So it created a lot of pressure on EC to register. So sometimes mistake can come for a correction. So if there is any mistake.
So those were some residents of Ketu South in the Volta region. Ivy Setoji spoke with them. Let's find out if this issue, how widespread this issue is. Ivy.
Hello, good afternoon.
Ivy, I know, good afternoon. I know you've spoken to some people, but how many of these people have admitted that they can't find their names in the register? How widespread would you say this is based on your interactions with the people?
Okay, so far, 15 people have found it in the voters register when they went to check. And some of them also said that they had to their phone, it was there, but when they go to the EC office or the exhibition center to check. So about this, the 50 people who spoke to me are worried about the situation. They want it to rectify as soon as possible because, according to them,
can you hear me, Ivy?
Yeah, hello. Yes,
I missed bits and pieces of what you said. Do you want to summarize it again for me so our viewers can hear you?
What I said earlier was about 15 people who spoke to me and said they couldn't find their name in the register. And some of they checked on their phone. The names were there on the phone. But when they go to the exhibition center, their names were not on the register. So they are kind of confused as to how possible that can be that their names were checked on the phone and it was there and then it's not in the main register. So they want it to rectify as early as possible because a lot of people are complaining. So that is the situation. We are still checking to see if more people have been affected by the situation.
Ivy, thank you very much. We'll leave it there because of the quality of sound we're getting. But Ivy indicates that at least she's spoken in the last few hours to at least 15 people who all confirm they could not find their names in the register. We head to the Upper East region where concerns over there as well have emerged over missing names. Albert Sori is correspondent. Albert, what is the situation and what are EC officials saying? Let's start with the situation first.
We saw that the NDC shared a list that they have of some people in the Binduri constituency of the Upper East region whose names were missing in the voters register. Now, these are names from as many as 23 polling stations. The list, number of people we see in the list that they gave is one polling station that has 25 people whose names are missing. But there are some who have, some polling stations that have up to as many as 457 names. Now, if you look at the list that they have, you are talking about thousands of names if you total it. So we cross-checked with the Electoral Commission this morning, and the Deputy Regional Director of the Electoral Commission, Walanyo Mensah, who we spoke to, would not say if the name that the NDC actually has is the number that they can't find. But he did say that they realized at the beginning of the exhibition that these challenges were there. Some people in that constituency couldn't find their names. His explanation is that these names are not actually names that are missing. But then when they came to the polling station and checked through the electoral roll, the names were not there. But there are those who were asked to come to the office of the Electoral Commission when they couldn't find their names. Actually, when they came and put their hands on the biometric machine, the names popped up. So it's a technical challenge, which he said he wasn't in the position to explain because they have sent that complaint to the office in Accra, and that explanation will be given. What he did say categorically was that the names are not missing. It's only that they are not showing on the electoral roll. But these people, their biometric details and their names are still there, So the problem that resulted in their names not being found is being resolved as we speak.
Albert, have you had the chance to engage with any of these people who, like we spoke to in the Volta region, who can't find their names in the register?
Unfortunately, not, because this just came to our attention this morning. So with the exhibition now being over, it's been difficult to get to them. But the Electoral Commission says that these are challenges that they actually saw from the beginning of the exhibition.
Albert, thank you very much for that update. Albert, sorry there from the Upper East region with the situation there. We're taking you to the Volta region and to the Upper East region where names don't seem to be in the register. Let's now hear from John Mahama, who is flag bearer of the party, on the anomalies recorded at the various centers.
Breach by candidates can result in dire consequences including disqualification. So how can we achieve this with a register that is riddled with such inaccuracies and irregularities? My brothers and sisters, one of the more startling revelations in respect of the ongoing exhibition exercise is a viral video of some EC officials secretly printing new voter ID cards for unknown registrants. This irregular conduct of the EC, which it has finally admitted to, casts a dark cloud over an already compromised process and is clearly against the law. Already the NDC has raised a number of important questions in a letter that we dispatched to the EC chairperson that must be answered urgently and candidly. And the first question we ask in the letter is, when did it come to the attention of the EC that some of the voters' ID cards issued to registrants during the recent voter registration exercise had duplicate ID numbers and therefore were defective? And the second question is, why did the EC not inform the political parties, who are the major stakeholder in our electoral process, in the spirit of fairness and transparency and in line with our established electoral practice? Indeed, the normal process would have been to invite political parties to deploy their agents to monitor any such process in accordance with our electoral laws and conventions. In its reaction to the viral video, the EC itself stated that this problem has been identified in as many as 100 districts throughout the country. I reiterate the demand of our General Secretary for the EC to publish in full the names and particulars of all persons issued with defective voters' ID cards. In addition to these very disturbing developments, we have noticed that the Commission failed to deploy BVD devices to all exhibition centers to allow for confirmatory fingerprint verification during the exhibition exercise. We further found out in some areas that there were huge differences between the total number of registrants as issued in the daily registration printouts, which was given to our agents during the voters registration, and the total number of registrants contained in the provisional register at the same centers. As one of its main arguments for the compilation of a new voters register, the Commission asserted that the methods and systems to be adopted for the compilation of this new register will eliminate the need for the process of manual verification. In view of this, Parliament approved a huge budget for the acquisition of 75,000 BVDs for all registration centers. One would think that these BVDs would have been deployed to each of the over 33,000 exhibition centers across the country in order to test the efficacy of the machines now. As it is, only 5,000 have been deployed nationwide, thus raising the possibility of widespread manual verification of voters on election day if these BVDs fail to function properly. All these matters, among others, must be discussed as part of a dialogue between EC and IPAC about the way forward. And finally, I wish to make an appeal to the international community, international election observers, and our domestic observers. Given all that has gone amiss with the electoral process and the likelihood of continued greater challenges ahead of this year's election, I'll want to urge them to focus their lenses on Ghana and arrive earlier in the country than ever before. This will enable them to engage the EC, IPAC, and all stakeholders as part of efforts to resolve these major problems with the register. My brothers and sisters,
so that's the flag bearer of the NDC, John Dramani Mahama. Joseph Opoku Gakpo was at that press conference which ended a while ago, and he's joining me on Zoom to give us more on that. Joseph, thank you for your time this afternoon. Now, there are a few issues that the NDC is raising. I mean, some not very new, but they're raising concerns about acceptability of the election results.
Former President Mahama made the point that if there is a flawed election, they can't be counted on to accept the outcome of that flawed election. And when the minority leader, Haina Idrisu, also got onto the podium, he rightly repeated that same point, that no one can accept, can expect them to accept the outcome of a flawed election. One of the questions that we did put to Mr. Mahama, seeking a reaction to, was what the alternatives were if they would not accept the outcome of a flawed election. That question was virtually glossed over in the course of the responses that went out from Mr. Mahama and the rest of the team. But they've insistently been making the point that the Constitution makes the point that there should be free and fair election, and that's wholly guaranteed. That is why they are insisting that it's only the outcome of a good election that's not flawed that they, at the level of the NDC, will go ahead and accept.
Let's talk about the numbers they put out today. Do they have a compilation of everything that essentially summarizes and says this is the figure of, or the figure of missing names as far as they're concerned? I know that they went, about it in a bit of a checkered way where they mentioned constituencies or various places, including Ashaiman. But do they have a figure that sums it all up?
So let me try and go through some of the specific examples from the Bindiri constituency to Klotikole to Japa. But just to begin, even the running mate of John Mahama, Professor Jena Nopukwajiman, from what Mr. Mahama told the news conference, has also had some difficulties with her name on the register, to the extent that, according to Mr. Mahama, she requested that someone goes to check her name on the register the feedback that they got was that there was a problem with her name on the register and she had to show up herself. She moved all the way to KEA, that's the Commander Edina Eguafo Abrem constituency, got to the district headquarters of the EC. She was told that there is a duplicate individual using the number on her card as well. So then they had to go ahead and take that card, destroy it completely, and reissue a new card to her. And Mr. Mahama's concern is that for Professor Nana Jinopoko, she was able to make the trip all the way from somewhere in the KEA constituency to the district capital to get that rectified. But when you look at the others, then chances are low that they could get those problems rectified even before the election itself. In the Binduri constituency, the NDC says there are about 444 people who couldn't find their names on the register, apart from another figure of 428 and another figure of 392. So that's a huge one there. Mr. Mahama again disclosed that in 18 centers in that same constituency in Binduri, more than 6,000 people, their names were omitted from the register. In the Japa constituency, which is in the Upper West region, the figure of those who couldn't find their names on the register, according to Mr. Mahama, are 2,057. Klotekole, 2,054 people couldn't find their names on the register in 12 different centers. Mr. Mahama again said that in the Krowo constituency, 2,453 people in 8 different centers couldn't find their names. And then he referenced the situation in Ashaiman, which has mainly been led by the MP and Esnobe, that up to 21,000 people, including Mr. Nobe himself, didn't have their names on the register when they protested. A new document was produced, but even that still had about 7,000 names missing. The others that are being mentioned include in the voter region as well. We know that's the NDC's main stronghold. In the voter region, Mr. Mahama detailed some of the missing names on the register. The Ketu South constituency, there are 6,185 of them. In the Anglo constituency, 984. In the Ketu North, 260. In the Keta constituency, 275. And in the northern region, then in the Kraga, there are more than 2,000 people. So they went on to give those specific details. But apart from that, the NDC is introducing a new claim as far as the issues with the register are concerned. Mr. Mahama said that in the Asawasi constituency, for example, which is just one of the 3 out of the 49 seats that the NDC holds in the region, they've seen a situation where 907 additional names have appeared mysteriously on the register, which wasn't part of the full list that they had as at the time that the registration exercise ended. And Mr. Mahama went on to claim that when they did the tallying of the figures as far as the registration is concerned from all the different constituencies across the country, they are seeing that in a number of the places, the figures are going up. And they say these figures represent the few that they've been minded to point out, but it's a bigger problem than even those specific details that they are putting up.
But Joseph, despite all of these concerns that the NDC raises, they also seem ready to engage. And Mr. Mahama touched a bit on that as well.
He made the point that a letter had actually gone out to officials of the Electoral Commission, particularly the Electoral Commissioner herself, demanding answers on some of these concerns that have come up. But more importantly, he said that the EC is getting into all these challenges because it's ignoring the advice of the Inter-Party Advisory Committee and is refusing to engage IPAC when it's taking decisions on some of these things. He went on to make the point that when you look at some of these challenges that are coming up, you recall that the EC did indicate that they are extending the whole exercise when it comes to the exhibition by 2 days. For Mr. Mahama, that is not enough. More time is needed. But more fundamentally, he thinks that it's a problem that stemmed from the fact that there was a flawed registration in the first place. So he made the point that going forward, their specific demand to the EC is that they would want to see the cleaning up being done to the register, after which the EC should come back with another exhibition exercise for people to double confirm their names. And he thinks that it's the rushed nature of the initial registration that is actually creating some of these challenges. So that engagement, he says, is Mr. Mahama says, is something that they are willing to do. But he goes on to say that he thinks the EC has taken a posture that paints the picture that they are not ready to engage the various political parties, particularly the Inter-Party Advisory Committee. They are again making a demand that the EC should go ahead and publish the full list of those additions that they've made to the register. You recall that Mr. Mahama had recently spoken about a video that had been circulating, and the claim being that there were new people who were being registered. The EC responded in a statement and said that this was a case of duplicated numbers that was being rectified. Mr. Mahama says they would want a full publication of the said additional names that's been added onto the list in the course of these duplication exercises, without which they think that it would be a difficult challenge going forward. Speaking of the engagement, there was actually a direct question to the NDC as to whether they would want to get the Peace Council or other civil society organizations involved in getting their demands met. Mr. Asiru Nketia, who is the party's General Secretary, said that this is something that's unfolding, that the Peace Council and other organizations should be seeing unfold, and on their own they can go ahead and engage in the necessary intervention to rectify the situation. But Mr. Asiru Nketia laid the problem directly at the doorstep of the EC and said that the EC actually has an advisory council of very eminent people who, according to him, are virtually in cahoots with the EC to engage in some of these activities, which he thinks is very worrying.
Well, Joseph, I was just going to ask you about the posturing of the EC, as Mr. Mahama puts it, but you've already rightly spoken to that. If there's anything else that our viewers ought to know, you added. Otherwise, that's it for me.
So the NDC, Mr. Mahama, and the minority leader, Haruna Idrisu, are raising concerns with what they say is a breach of the constitutional instrument that allows for the EC to go on with its work. And according to them, the EC is mandated to publicly put out whatever the details of its voters register is, to the extent that it's supposed to be out there on their website, which they've not seen being done by the EC. And so they want to see a situation where that said breach is rectified. Mr. Idrisu again raised concern that when Parliament actually oversaw approval for the budgets of the Electoral Commission to undertake the voter registration exercise, the general expectation was that they would come up with a register that's superior and is making use of a more superior technology than what existed previously. But as a party, and Mr. Mahama made this point, they are disappointed that even after the millions of dollars that was sunk into the new registration exercise, the outcome is what they think is a flawed document that they think is very worrying. And finally, Mr. Mahama gave a directive to the various party executives at the constituency level and the regional level to suspend all campaigning. You know that Mr. Mahama and Professor Nano Pukojman have suspended their campaigns. He has given an additional directive that at the constituency level, the parliamentary candidates and the executive should go ahead and suspend their campaigning and pay particular attention to the exhibition exercise, after which they can then go ahead and resume their campaign.
Interesting. Joseph, thank you so much for those updates there, comprehensively put together. Joseph Opoku Gakpo monitored that press conference by the NDC.